my mouth and the meditation of my heart be mindful of thee, O Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. Would you please be seated? Well, Sweets Month is going to continue at Shepherd of the Hills. We've had sermons on pornography, adultery, murder, and we're going to continue, because we've been talking about David the last month. We're going to continue because we have another wonderful story. We have the story of David and Absalom, Tamar and Amnon, look up his name. Ahithophel. Remember that? We're going to talk today about a difficult topic. We're going to talk about sexual abuse. We're going to talk about incest. We're going to talk about rape. The Bible, in some people's mind, is a book of sort of cotton candy characters. Everybody is sweet and happy, and all we have to do in life is just be like our Bible story people. Well, that's not the Bible I know. The Bible is about real people in real situations, living in a life that is broken and painful. And today we have one of the most painful episodes of the whole Old Testament. It concludes with David saying these words, "Absalom, Absalom, my son, would I have died instead of you?" This is the closing of the story of Absalom and David, and it begins very badly. The whole story, if you will, can be boiled down into one thing. Your sins will find you out. The cover-up is worse than the crime. Not speaking at times is just as bad as saying the wrong thing. Oh, let me back up for a second. Margie read this wonderfully, rather tedious passage with these strange names about these strange people. Ahithophel and Shidisha and Shemashiko and the Wiki Wacky Woko and all this and that. And let's get on. Well, 1979, the Episcopal Church changed its lectionary. One of the things we did with the new prayer book was to shorten the readings because people were complaining they spent too long in church. Funny about that, isn't it? Well, one of the things they did was they cut down the readings by about a third in length. And the problem was that you lost a lot of context. And so you've got the short story of Absalom, you just have his death, and you have no clue why he died. What's going on here? And actually, that's actually more tedious, a story that you don't understand, than the long account. So I'm going to give you the long story. Last week we had the conclusion of the David and Bathsheba story. We have preached about that for 2 weeks, and it was spread over 2 weeks. And it closed with the prophet Nathan saying to David, "David, you must repent, turn yourself over to God, ask for forgiveness, and God will forgive you. But there is still justice in this earth. And though God has forgiven you, and you shall be saved, and you are still beloved by God, things are going to happen to you in the consequence of what you've done. And you remember what Nathan said? He prophesied that your wives and your concubines would be raped in public, your kingdom overthrown, everything destroyed. Whoa, that's a fun little story. Well, the story continues. We skip a bit in our readings. We learn that the child born of the adultery of David and Bathsheba dies. And they subsequently have a second child, Solomon. We'll read about Solomon later in the books. He's the King Solomon. But David has many wives and many concubines, and he has many children, and they're sort of spread out across the royal palace. The oldest son is a man named Amnon. His mother is Michal, the daughter of Saul, David's first wife. You remember about a month or so ago when we started the David cycle? I preached on the topic of David came into Jerusalem, bringing with him the Ark of the Covenant, and his wife Michal looked out of the palace window and looked upon him with contempt because he was making a jackass out of himself by dancing in public and showing his emotions and this and that. And that was the topic of my sermon on divorce, that when a relationship reaches the point of contempt, that really is the point when it's over. Well, the child of that relationship was Amnon. And Amnon was a strong, healthy young man. father David came into his room and said, "Son, you're so sick. What can I do?" He said, "Oh, send my sister Tamar to tend me." And Tamar said, "No, no, 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 Dad. This is a little creepy." "No." And David said, "Just do it." "No, I don't want to do it. Just do it. Just get it over with." And so Tamar is sent to care for her half-brother Amnon. Well, as soon as everybody leaves the room, David's gone. Amnon gets out of bed, rips off his clothes, and said, "I'm healed, babe. I've been waiting for this moment. Marry me." And she said, "Ew. You're my half-brother. Gross." "But I love you." He said, "Still, that's gross." And he rapes her. Well, after he rapes her, he figured out he really wasn't in love all that time. There was something else going on. And in fact, after he had done the deed, "I'm done with you, babe. Hit the road." And Tamar says, "You gotta marry me now. The servants know what you've done. I'm no longer a virgin. I can't get married. My life is over unless you do the right thing." "Hit the road, babe. My lust is satisfied. Let's see what else is there." And Tamar flees from the room. Now David, it's a small house. It's relatively small. Everybody knows what's going on. And David the king learned that Amnon had raped Tamar. And what does David do? Well, 2 Samuel chapter 13 says, "When King David heard of all these things, he became very angry. But he would not punish his son Amnon, because he loved him, for he was his firstborn." What's David doing in the case of incest and rape? Just be quiet. He tells Tamar, "Don't make a stink. It'll pass. You'll get over it. We don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of people. We are the royal family. We can't be seen in a bad light." Well, Tamar is taken in by her full brother Absalom. And Absalom is very angry. He's angry with Amnon for raping his sister. He's angry with David for covering it up and saying it doesn't matter. And Absalom bides his time. And the Bible tells us that 2 years pass, and Absalom is waiting for the chance. And there's a public festival, a harvest festival, one of these things where everybody goes outside, they have bonfires, a lot of booze flowing, it's dark. Now's the chance. Absalom has his servants kill Amnon to revenge himself for his sister's disgrace. Now, is his sister's disgrace real? Well, we never read about her again. She, in essence, is as good as dead. She's a used, spent woman who spends the rest of her life, as far as we know, shut up in a room now because she's a disgraced woman. Well, David, no secrets in this world, David finds out that Absalom was behind the murder of Amnon, and Absalom has to flee. Absalom is now the oldest son, because Amnon's dead. And Absalom flees to the court of a neighboring kingdom, and he spends 3 years there. Well, Joab, one of David's generals, says this is not a good thing politically. Absalom is going to be king one day, and we don't want the king to hang out with our enemies. Let's bring him home. David, you've got to forgive him. Let bygones be bygones. David says, "No, I'm not going to do that." He killed the firstborn. He killed my child. Well, Joab says to himself, "I got to fix this problem." And he finds a woman, we don't know her name, but she's called the woman from Teoka. And he has her go to David, and she tells David, the lawgiver, the king, a story. "David, I had 2 sons, and I'm a widow, and my sons were working in the field, and they've gotten a fight, and one of them killed the other. And now my family is demanding justice, which means an eye for an eye, a death for a death. And if I turn him over, I will have no children. One has killed the other, and now the law requires that he be put to death too. Help me, David. You're a father. You know what's going involved. You know what I'm feeling. And David says, yes, I will pardon you because I understand the importance of your children to you. And then the woman turns around and says, well, David, what about Absalom? Why won't you pardon your own son? And David, because this is in a public place, is put in the spot, and he says, okay, he can come back, but I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. David is not like the father in the story of the prodigal son. He doesn't welcome Absalom home forgiven, loved. He says, you can move back into the palace, but if I'm in this room, you're not in this room. I don't want to see it. Well, Absalom comes home. He still hates his father. Why does he hate his father? For the cover-up of his sister's rape. For not being the father that he should be. For not doing what was right and true and just. And Absalom hates his father. But Absalom's not done. He knows he's going to be king one day, and so he starts by hanging out in front of the palace. Well, in those days, if you wanted justice, you wanted a dispute resolved, if you wanted an issue of laws you came and talked to the king. And Absalom would talk to everybody coming to the palace. And as they leave, he would say, well, you know, I really think you have a point there. I don't think my father made the right decision. But when I'm king one day, I'll make this right. And Absalom did this for 3 years. And in 3 years, the Bible tells us he won the hearts of the people of Israel because he was all things to all people. And Absalom sent his father a note and said, Dad, I'm off to Hebron for a few days. David said, fine, do that. And when he went off to Hebron, Absalom raised the banner of revolution. And the Bible tells us the people of Israel flocked to Absalom's banner. He's young, he's handsome, he's beautiful, he likes us, he trusts, he believes us. And the people came and rose as one against David, God's anointed. And all David had was his bodyguard of Cushites. What are Cushites? Ethiopians, black African mercenaries. He had his bodyguard, and he had a small contingent of Israel's professional soldiers led by Joab. See, the army of Israel is sort of like the American army, a very small contingent of professionals, and then millions of National Guardists and reservists, weekend warriors who come when the king issues a call. Those people, as one, went with Absalom. And only the mercenaries and the elite troops, led by Joab, followed their king. Well, David has to pull out of Jerusalem. His position is untenable. He moves to the countryside. And as David leaves, he finds all of his advisors, all of the people whom he trusted. He had stopped praying to God a long time ago and listened to his lawyers. One of whom was Ahithophel, his trusted counselor, his confidant. Well, Absalom marches in, takes over the palace, and Ahithophel says, I support you! And he's made Absalom's counselor. And Absalom says, I need to consolidate my rule. I need to make sure that things stay this way, otherwise I'm in big trouble. And Ahithophel says, well, what you need to do is you need to do something so public, so awful, so powerful, that there's no going back. The people who back you after you do this have got to stick with you. And Ahithophel recommends raping all of David's concubines and wives. And the prophecy of Nathan is made true. It's not a foreign enemy who rapes the concubines and the wives of David. It's his own son. It's his own son who is driven from the palace. His own son has defiled, has basically said, Dad, you are dead to me. What's yours is mine, including your babes. There's no going back. If you support Absalom after he does this, you have thrown in your lot. Because there's no walking back this one back. Now David is in the forest with his small troops. And Joab says, look, we have to act now. These These guys are not organized. They're weekend warriors. We need to attack while we have surprise on our side. David says, okay, do it, but spare Absalom. He's my son. And Joab leads the small elite army into the forest of Ephraim and attacks, and 10,000 of Israel's National Guardsmen, weekend warriors, are killed. And Absalom flees on a donkey, and he's going through the forest, and he's riding along, and a low-lying branch catches him in the neck, lifts him off his horse. And the troops, led by Joab, find him, and the troops say, hey, David said to leave him alone. We'll bring him back as a prisoner. And Joab, the general, says, no, as long as this guy's alive, we've not won. And he kills Absalom. And Margie read the end of the story. A Cushite, an Ethiopian, a mercenary, was sent back to say, I've got good news and bad news. The revolution is over, and your son, Absalom, is dead. And the story of Absalom and Tamar concludes with David's cry. Now, was David some sort of fuddy-duddy old man who just, oh, it's all right, whatever you want to do? No. David's cry was a cry that he knew that he was responsible for the death of 2 sons, the disgrace of his daughter, the civil war, the rape of his wives. Why? Because he covered up the crime of the rape of Tamar. Friends, your sin will catch you out. David's cry of despair at the death of his children, the death of his son, is a cry of the realization that, my God, I have so screwed up my life, and my own children are dead because of me. You can never make an evil better by ignoring it or hoping it goes away. The Bible is not a storybook of candy-coated pictures. Tamar is a victim of sexual abuse. When I was a brand new priest, I could give you plenty of advice about marriage, how to raise your children, because I had no experience. Now I think 30 years later, oh my God, why did I do that to my kids? But one of the things I've encountered many times, and it's always shocked me, is the prevalence of abuse. See, when I was a very naive young priest, I only had my own life experience, and I had a happy childhood. I mean, the church was a wonderful thing. The priests were all godly, good men. My parents were wonderful. I never knew anything like this would happen. It happened, but to other people. And they must be poor people, or sad people, or people, that I would take pity on. Then I got into the world and I found that abuse, incest, is no respecter of class, or race, or the amount of money you have. You find it everywhere. And I continue to minister to women who are in their 70s and 80s, who 50, 60, 70 years ago were abused as children. And the grief is still there. What did I do to deserve this? Well, they did what Tamar did. They did nothing wrong. And many of them were like Tamar, where their families, their mothers, their fathers just didn't want to know. 70 years later, 60 years later, they're living with a sense of stain and brokenness and wretchedness. The church follows culture. I know we shouldn't, but we do. We're like the world around us. We try to be different. And our culture, at least my culture growing up in the north in Philadelphia, boys did not cry. If you cried in public, only Lou Gehrig could do that with Gary Cooper and cry to the Yankees. And then he had to have only a single tear. You couldn't cry. You couldn't show emotion. If you had trouble, if you had problems, if you had pain. John Wayne's words, Fort Apache, were never explain, never complain, apologizing is a sign of weakness. That was was my coda. That was my code. That was the way my little world lived. And you never, ever talked about what happened in your family. Bad things happen, you know it, and nobody else did. And that was carried over into the church, that cultural thing. And so we've had generations of abuse, where one priest out of 1,000 can poison the well for so many people. As a hospice priest, for 5 years working in Okeechobee and St. Lucie counties, my job was to go to be with the dying, and I would go see everybody, and I can't tell you how many times I would talk to somebody and say, I haven't been to church since I was 12, and I got to tell you, Father, I was molested by the priest. Only one man, maybe out of 1,000 priests, can do that, but the destruction he leaves, and the church's response of, let's shut him to Okeechobee. Let's just keep quiet. You'll get over it. You don't want to embarrass me. David chose this path, and what was the consequence of this path? The death of 2 of his sons, the destruction of his family, and the destruction of Israel. Friends, cover up. I mean, if anybody, you all were alive, except for Sandy. Richard Nixon knew that second-rate burglary compared as nothing to a cover-up afterwards. In your life, there's a way out. It's the way David took. Repentance. David repented. David asked God for forgiveness. David got right with God, but David still had to suffer the consequences of his sin. God forgave David, but Nathan said, you're still going to get in the neck. Then David forgot God, and he trusted in Ahithophel and his lawyers. And he didn't listen to God. And the lawyer said, just keep this quiet, put Tamar away, we don't want to embarrass, Amnon's going to be king. We just don't want to talk about this. Where if David had acted according to God's law, this is covered in the Pentateuch. These things are discussed. And David says, well, I need to make this go away. Friends, if we want to make sin go away, what we do is we repent of it to the Lord. We don't hide it. I hear confessions, not many, but most Episcopalians have an idea of confession is like, there was a Montgomery Clift movie in the 50s called I Confess. Montgomery Clift is against character as a young priest. And Montgomery Clift, before he became a priest, had an affair with, I think it was Ann Baxter. And now, years later, he's a priest. The gardener at the church murders somebody. And it all has to do around the woman. And the plot is the gardener goes and confesses to Montgomery Clift, and now Montgomery Clift can't say or do a thing, and he's arrested and tried for murder. That's not how it works. If you come to me in confession and you confess to me that you have molested a child, I will not give you absolution until you turn yourself into the police. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. But people would prefer, our culture prefers to make it go away. Don't stir up the trouble. Friends, stir up trouble. You know, many of you know the fact that my mother was a psychologist profession, and she was the chief psychologist at the Kansas State Hospital for the mentally insane, criminally insane. So when we would get out for Christmas and Thanksgiving, we always had interesting table talk. My mother worked with pedophiles, and she worked with serial killers, and she worked with these people, and she told me, George, if somebody had only caught these guys earlier on, after their first rape, they would not have gone on to commit 25 more. And some people will never stop. They can't help it. Amnon, if he had been stopped, If David had listened to his daughter Tamar before all of this occurred, when Tamar is saying, "Dad, he's creepy, there's something wrong here, don't leave me alone with him," 2 sons would be alive. A kingdom would not be destroyed. A household would not be ruined. But we don't listen to little girls, do we? It's inconvenient. Just go along. Friends, what I'm saying to you today is pursue justice in all cases, whether it's convenient or not. That doesn't mean you have to be a public nuisance, doesn't mean you have to be a scold, but whatever you do, don't cover up the crime. Bring it to God and bring it to those in authority if it needs to be dealt with by authority. When we don't do that, the church in some places in this world is so devastated and destroyed. Its credibility has been all but ruined because of the sex abuse scandal. And it's not like 99 out of 100 priests and nuns were perverts or sadists. It just took one. But when the church decides that it's more important to maintain our reputation rather than to seek truth and justice, then you're setting the ground for collapse. We see it in the Bible, in this story, the collapse of the kingdom, the destruction of the family. I know this has been, as I say, Sweeps Month. All sorts of exciting topics that when all our seasonal people come back, we turn to the candy-coated stuff and are all happy glad. So I got to get it in sometime. But friends, this stuff is important. Now, not all of us live with this issue. Enough of us do that it's important that I speak to. But even in the small things, we must pursue justice. We cannot be afraid of the civil consequences of turning in somebody who's committed a crime. Oh, I love him and I don't want him to suffer it because he still has to pay the penalty, the civil penalty. God will forgive if a person repents, but you can't fix things for others. They have to fix it themselves. And there's only one way.